Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Untapped Labor Market. We're pleased to see there are over 200 companies from the Halifax Chamber joining us today. So whether you're with a not-for-profit, a university, a bank, a small company, we hope that you'll come away today with some tips, strategies, and even some extra motivation to do more within your own organization and also within Halifax to help advance diversity, inclusion, engagement. And today, of course, we are featuring a panel that we hope will give you some expert insights on their experience and their insights on what they've been able to do themselves and tips to help in your business. I'd like to acknowledge the board, the task force, and the Halifax Chamber staff for helping to bring forward some of these events this year and really spotlight diversity and inclusion more. And we have a moderator today, Don Bureaux from the Nova Scotia Community College. And we're happy to have Don with us, not only because of his post-secondary experience, but also his experience with the Ivany Commission. So many of you would recall 8 years ago, we had the Ivany report, the One Nova Scotia report. And if you look at it now, if you are to Google the dashboard, you'll see that even now, underrepresented groups, Indigenous peoples and people of African Nova Scotian descent in Nova Scotia are still underrepresented in the workforce. And so this is something that many groups, many people are trying to advance. And so, today there's still a gap on that front. And so in today's discussion, we'll be talking about the economic opportunity to bring diverse communities, the ones I've noted, plus other, diverse communities, women, other people with disabilities. There's so much opportunity that Halifax has to continue to grow, and collectively, we want to ensure that we are growing together and bringing all communities into that success. And so as far as today's session goes, we will leave lots of time for questions. If you have questions, please submit through your Q&A button. And I would like to thank the panelists for joining us today and spending some time sharing their expertise with us. Today we have Bradley Day, co-founder of Placemaking 4G, and actually a recent speaker with our Accessing a Skilled Workforce Task Force. So thanks again, Bradley, for coming back a second time to share your insights. And we have Tova Sherman. She's the CEO of Reachability. We have Nicole Johnson-Morrison, President and CEO of Edunova, and Susan Gugu, who is Director of Human Resources at Wakaba. So thank you all. Really appreciate you bringing forward your perspectives today. And I should say that, again, this topic, we hope to scratch the surface in an hour, get some of your perspectives. We recognize that we're not going to be able to tap into all the complex issues related to every element of this discussion around the social, societal, historic, economic drivers that make this an important discussion. We're mindful of those, and so we're hoping that we'll continue as a chamber to be able to host these sorts of discussions. But again, we hope to scratch the surface today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dawn to moderate today's discussion. Dawn.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As Michelle mentioned, I have the honor of being the moderator this afternoon, and we each are going to be, each of the panelists in a moment will be sharing a response to a question that we presented to them, and then we'll have a great opportunity to ask them more questions. But to begin, I want to just share a few thoughts with you on this, what I think is a critically important topic. And I want to begin by just creating a bit of context about point in time. And if you think where we are today, approaching the middle of February, and we look back over the past year, wow, what a crazy year the world has experienced. And from this year has emerged a number of phenomena, new terms, new habits, new ways of working together. But around the category of new terms, we've heard things like new normal. We've heard things like unprecedented change in the world, which again, I think are interesting and new. But one that's really intrigued me is this notion of what opportunity do we have to build back better? And if you think about building back better, what are we building back better from right now in our current context? I would argue that society, that Nova Scotia, Canada, and the world is at this kind of intersection with what we call 5 different crises. And those 5 different crises are obviously a health crisis that we've been dealing with now for the past year. And the numbers are daunting. I'm struck by the time period between December of 2019 and March of 2020, those 3 months before Nova Scotia was shut down. The world saw 300,000 cases of COVID. In the past 12 hours, we have had 300,000 cases of COVID. So obviously we're still in a health crisis. The second one obviously is an economic crisis. And Nova Scotia was particularly hit when the economy was really slowed down last spring. We have about 975,000 people in Nova Scotia, a workforce of about 450,000 people. And within 2 weeks of the province closing down, we had 75,000 people in the province lose their jobs. Now that's recovered to a certain degree, but overall we were hit by the economic crisis. Number 3, the world is still facing a climate crisis, and that's emerging more and more to be a critical factor that we as human beings have to deal with. Number 4, we have a social crisis. This COVID pandemic has put a bright light on those that are facing barriers in society, those most vulnerable amongst us, youth, people with disabilities, people who have had a hard time participating in the economy. And very important movements like Black Lives Matter have really received much more attention, and they need to receive much more. So it's elevated decades and decades of a situation that we need now to pay particular more attention to. And the 5th crisis that I think that we're all kind of grappling with right now is kind of a humanistic response to those first 4. It's a crisis of hope. It's a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of truth. You know, people are less hopeful for a brighter tomorrow. There's a lack of trust and truth in society. But you know, given all of that, I'm kind of bullish. I think Nova Scotia is positioned so well to truly build back better. And by building back better, a key part of that is creating a much more inclusive, welcoming economy and a much more inclusive and welcoming workplace. And the 200 plus people who have signed on today, you are obviously committed and interested in learning much more about this. And that's why I'm so excited about the work that the Chamber is leading in this area. I'm excited about our five panelists today. So they're able to share with us their thoughts on really, if we're thinking about building a better province, a great province is only great if everybody is able to participate in that greatness. And that's kind of what this conversation is about today. How can we work together to create a much more inclusive, welcoming environment, especially in the workplace, for those who have traditionally felt barriers in that area. So without any further ado, I'm going to begin to ask our panelists a few questions. I would encourage people to please keep your videos on the panel, on the view in the panel mode, if you don't mind, to be able to see the speakers. Any questions, please pop them into the chat line. And I will be doing a gentle tug to try to keep us on time. So let's get started. And unfortunately, when we were making our introductions, Tracy Menge was not mentioned. So Tracy, welcome and thank you for being one of our panelists, and we're looking forward to your comments. So Tracy, maybe we'll start with you, if you don't mind turning. We'll start with Tracy, and Tracy, the question is, tell us a bit about yourself, Tracy, and what's your understanding of your community's concerns regarding hiring and employment, and what potential changes do you see for Nova Scotia? So Tracy, we'll have you start, please.
Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So I'm Tracy Mingy. I'm from Eskazoni First Nation, but I work for, I'm the benefits officer for KMKNO. So I work on behalf of the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. And my work is, I work to ensure Mi'kmaq inclusion and participation in projects happening in Nova Scotia, the larger types of projects. And so each project is different in nature and scope and size. So, but we try to include in all of our discussions with them and start with developing a positive relationship early, talking and communicating with them and talking about training and education, employment targets, Mi'kmaq representation in projects. So I think that, just opening the communication and being open and making sure that we're available to answer both proponents and organizations' questions and making a friendly environment to work in.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Tracy. Okay, next we're going to jump to Bradley. Bradley, same question.
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. And I hope that my 5-month-old puppy doesn't interrupt me here. It's the third Zoom presentation of the day, so we're hopeful here, but no promises.
You may have some input, right? So if you have something to say, we'll invite him to say something.
Be careful what you wish for. My name is Bradley Day. I am a proud member of the African Nova Scotian community. I grew up in the north end of Halifax. My seventh great-grandfather came to Nova Scotia in 1789 as a Black pioneer. He essentially was a founder of a place called Jordantown, which is one of many over 60 plus Black communities across the province. And I'm able to know that story because one of my cousins did his PhD on our family history. That's the amount of research it took. And so from the perspective of all of these founded communities, these Black communities, we don't know those stories. And that is something that is top of mind with me as we navigate through another African Heritage Month and continue to have these conversations. I am a co-founder and co-CEO of a social enterprise called Placemaking 4G CIC. The CIC stands for Community Interest Company, and we give 60% of our profits back into community. We founded our organization because there was a need to do things differently from the recruiting perspective. We found when we looked at things from an attraction and retention perspective in Atlantic Canada, there were a lot of challenges and hurdles. The communities particularly affected by that did not really have a space or voice in the recruiting process. Some of the language that was being used in recruiting did not sort of rub us the right way. And so, one of those, to give an example, let's look at the commonly used term, cultural fit. I find, and it is a fact that word and that term fit can be very othering to many people. And so we started to think about that. And if the majority of your space looks different than somebody else, and you're saying that you're looking for a fit in that culture, you're not saying that you're looking for everybody. And so you're also sort of drawing a circle around your culture and saying, this is not progressive. This is not something that is going to move forward. It is something you need to fit into and change something about yourself to fit into that. So we changed that from cultural fit to cultural contributor. And that way you start to think differently about the process. You start to think differently about the people that you're bringing into your space. And so we constantly work with organizations to create environments where we can really foster an environment, a climate of welcoming and inclusion, where everybody can bring the full version of themselves. And as we get into this conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion, the way this whole thing was framed was, let's make the business case for this. And we've all heard things like the ability, if you hire a diverse workforce, you'll be able to innovate. That'll increase by 83%. Responsiveness to changing customer needs increases by 31%. Team collaboration increases by 42%. All of these great economic reasons. And I want to pose a few questions that come from a different perspective. I want you to consider why underserved groups require a business case to exist and thrive within organizations when the rest can just show up. I want you to, think about and consider how the business case for diversity has legitimized and sustained exploitive practices. If we look at the way that people fought to keep colonial and young countries dependent on slavery, there were economic reasons that they fought for those. So, let's keep in mind that Canada is built on stolen land. And so, when people make sort of the business case for it, we're making a very individualistic case for it. It's not about innovation. It's not about customer needs. This is not a moral issue. This is not an issue of ethics. The core problem of racism has been to its core a problem of power. It is not poor ethics. It is not poor morals. It is not a lack of knowledge even. The root problem of racism and oppression is self-interest. If we're worried about our economics, if we're worried about political, cultural self-interest, we need to take a hard look at ourselves and ask, as individuals, as decision makers within systems and organizations, do we support racism and oppression? The takeaway I have for you is, when you engage in equity work, consider how your work is benefiting underserved communities. Consider whether you are engaging in equity work to make yourself feel good. Is your experience with engaging equity work centered around your feelings or around the reality of somebody else's lived experience? There is a difference between feeling better and doing better. Do better.
Thank you, Bradley. And I really, really appreciate how you reframed that. That's a very, very important way to look at it. So thank you very, very much. Okay, Tova, over to you.
Hi there, my name is, as mentioned, Tova Sherman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Reachability Association. And I like to describe our agency as a place that really is just looking to equalize the playing field for all our citizens. And although we are inclusive of disability, we are not exclusive. I have to say that because often when I come to represent, some of the thoughts around inclusion around persons with disabilities, I worry people think maybe reachability is just one door for one sector, and it's really about anyone who feels marginalized. That said, I want to say that also I'm a first person voice. And what I mean by that is I live with disability. I live with a cognitive, I live with a mental health disability. I live with an immune disease. I have all kinds of fun things, which I don't need to talk about, but they inform what I do and what I think and how I see things. And further to that, growing up in a family where really everyone had a disability and I didn't know it was so stigmatized, it really also framed my approach to how I moved forward in my decision to do what I could, even though there were many things I couldn't do. You know, I live by a quote. I never let that which I cannot do get in the way of that which I can. Because one thing about living with disability, the stigma is not only around you, it's often self-inflicted, and you believe what you hear and what you're taught. And as a result, people are very stigmatized individually and often would never talk about disability in the workplace. Let me move to that point. The fact remains that it is a bias, a clear bias about disability from where we learned about disability that is leaving persons with disabilities out of the workplace. For an example, just to be clear, right now, well, as of April 2018, the labor force employment participation of persons with disabilities in North America was 21%, whereas for people who do not identify or see themselves at all or are not living with disability was 69%. So what I'm trying to say is we know that there's a difference. And as Bradley did so beautifully with his stats, I'd like to juxtapose those stats with the fact that whether it's explicit, or which means really a conscious, or implicit, the unconscious bias, the attitudes are the problem. I had someone ask me the other day, how can we collect data and analytics to show the improvement in our workplace of diversity and inclusion? And I said, what a great question. But you have to first say, do we even care enough about it? Because as much as people say they would like to, I'm getting very confused by, on one hand, hearing this desire, but on the other hand, hearing stories that unfortunately reflect a misunderstanding, despite all of these wonderful statistics that might come out today. The reality is that it is full out prejudice. It is full out bias when we make a decision to allow conscious or unconscious information to affect our decisions and not be genuinely curious. And when I say curious, I mean the ability to say, I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm open and I want to learn. Dawn, I always say to everyone, if you really want to be inclusive of people with disabilities in your workforce, it's education or osmosis. And what I mean by that is education is simple. It's knowledge. It's basing the knowledge on what we know is not even best practice, but next practices, staying ahead of the curve and understanding where we need to go, not just, as you said, where we've been. The other part is osmosis. And what I mean by that is I go around the country and I do all kinds of interesting training around inclusion of diverse populations. And I can always tell, for instance, when someone has worked with someone who uses a wheelchair, just as a quick example, because they'll be doing this when I'm talking about inclusion or giving an example that involves somebody with a physical disability. What they're doing is they're not agreeing. They're saying, I've done that. I know what you mean. Education and osmosis are the two basic premises we need if we're serious about replacing the bias that is now affecting the decision-making of employers instead of becoming allies of disability. Right now in Canada, over 650,000 people are living with disability and saying, I'm ready to work. And their biggest barrier, their single biggest barrier is the misunderstanding and the biases that are so ingrained in how we think. And education and osmosis are required if we're sincere about moving forward about inclusion, period.
Love it. Love that framing, Tova. Thank you. And we're going to have some time, hopefully, to unpack that a bit more, but great places to start. Wow, Nicole, you're up next.
Thank you, Dawn, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Nicole Johnson Morrison, and I'm the president and CEO of EduNova. For those of you who are not aware of what EduNova is, we work to raise the profile of Nova Scotia's education within global markets. So we work with all the universities, the P12 sector, the language schools, and everyone that plays a role, all stakeholders in supporting international education. And as part of that, we have a really interesting program that is called the Study and Stay program, where we work with students from the entirety of Nova Scotia that are in the post-secondary education fields to help to retain them in the province. And I know that I've heard from some of my colleagues so far talk about throwing out the statistics in terms of what that actually looks like. But I don't know that people really realize how large of a group that is. We have on average years between 2018 to now between 15,000 to 12,000, 12 to 15,000 international students that come through Nova Scotia that are studying at our institutions, that are interested in learning about our cultures and our values. And these are diverse peoples that are coming from all types of backgrounds. And for me, as a professional and as a Black woman, you know, my intersectionality with my community is very intricate. I identify as an African Nova Scotian woman. I identify as an African woman, period. I identify as a cis woman that is a descendant from enslaved people. I identify as a migrant, as an immigrant, as a mother. And many of those cross-sectionalities are represented in the groups that I represent. So international students that come to Nova Scotia, or newcomers, period, you know, come to the province bringing extensive skill sets and passion and resilience, and really often very strong hopes and dreams of staying here and helping to build a province. And it becomes inherent upon us as Nova Scotians to help to support them in a way that would help to support and grow the economy. So for me, when I listen to many of the students that I talk to, and I have the luxury of speaking to international students from all varied backgrounds across the province, and many of them, I hear that desire and the interest in staying here, but I also hear them clearly say that they don't often feel that Nova Scotia businesses, organizations, community councils, wherever they work, is not very inclusive for them, because there's often that, the bit that I find that always stands out to me, that microaggression that I don't think a lot of Nova Scotians ever get, which is, where are you from? Which basically means, well, you don't really belong here. Excuse me, you don't belong here. So, you know, tell us where you're from. And that is often a way to close the door to newcomers that are really trying to integrate and to learn and to give themselves, you know, like many immigrants. I had to start off my career the same way. I started a business in order to really advance myself in my career, and many immigrants are doing that. But what does that tell us? It tells us that these folks that are coming, whether they're immigrants, whether they're new students, and they're often coming with really interesting ideas. They are interested in staying in Nova Scotia. They're interested in growing careers here. They're interested in contributing, and they would like to be included, not just seen as token hires. And that sometimes can be a problem. So I think from my perspective, just sharing some of those stats again, for 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, over 1,000 international students chose to stay in Nova Scotia. That is phenomenal. That is growth that we have envisioned through the Ivanhoe report, as I think Don started out expressing. So that is, we're achieving that, but it's incumbent upon us now as Nova Scotians to retain those folks that want to stay here. They've already expressed an interest in being here. They're studying at world-class institutions that Nova Scotia has. So certainly they have the skill sets and the capabilities. So it's now just incumbent on us to really try to do more to ensure that they are really being involved at a deep intrinsic level in our workplaces, and not just given you know, minor tasks because of the fact that there's an assumption that they might not be capable. They are, if they're educated in Nova Scotia, we are all saying that we believe that our institutions are the best in the world, which they are. We should be willing to also have those people hired in our organizations and really try to ensure that we are able to retain them, not just because of the fact that it's the economic thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do. There are people here that are willing and able, and I'm excited about the discussion today because there's a lot that we can unpack in terms of how we can go about helping to bridge the gap. And I know within many organizations, there's a lot of opportunity for them to really try to plug into the student and newcomer diaspora. And I certainly would like to share my own perspectives on that. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words on that, Don.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Again, great comments. It's So far, such a rich discussion. So thank you for that, Nicole. Susan.
Hi, I apologize. I had to turn my video off. My connection is very unstable. So I hope you guys can hear me.
Great.
So my name is Susan Gugu. I'm from Wegumba First Nation, from Unabagi, Cape Breton. And I live in a community about 1,000 people, approximately 1,100, something like that. And I'm the director of employment and training here. And I've been working in education and employment field over 10 years. Some of the community concerns regarding hiring and employment, in my perspective here, is really the genuine interest for companies and businesses to be inclusive and to diversify their workforce, and not just to check off some box with their companies. I see a lot of people wanting to reach out or to hire, but they haven't communicated with those communities that they're trying to draw employees from. And if they do hire these people, there's always concern on my end when it comes to, they probably never even really know too much about the culture, their values, the traditions that they come with when it comes to, or the intergenerational trauma that comes along with them. So I think if a company or business wants to hire or reach out to communities, they really need to educate themselves with the culture and the history in order for them to really be welcoming and really show a genuine interest. And then, the potential opportunities would be just creating those relationships with such people as myself, directors, employment officers, EDOs, and just come visit the communities. If you're looking for workers, talk to us, create relationships with us, build that trust. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Another great set of, again, kind of deep learnings. And I think that's what today is all about. So thank you so much. So great comments in the chat line, folks. Thank you. Keep them coming in. So look, I'm going to open up a question here, and it's a bit of an awkward with not being able to see all the panelists and everyone in the group. So I'm going to try to manage this the best I can. Look, I'm going to go back to Bradley. Bradley, you made such a great comment, everyone did, but you made a great comment about reframing the notion of cultural fit to cultural contribution. And I'd ask you to just ask you first, and the other panelists, to think, we all have blind spots, and when we're looking to bring a diverse workforce into our organization, what blind spots have you seen people having, Bradley? And any ways to suggest people to kind of help learn and overcome those blind spots that people may have? So just a couple minutes, each person on that question, please. So Bradley, back to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I guess where to start. I think to start is even in kind of how we ponder this question. And so a lot of times folks like myself, like Tova, like Nicole, like Tracy, like Susan, get asked, what can we do differently? What have you seen that's happening? And I think a lot of that, it comes down to asking, what can you do? You can do anything. You can make those changes because you're in a position of power. So I want to frame it more as, what will you do? What will you do as an organization to diversify your workforce? Susan said it, come out to community. Come out to community, meet people, have conversations. I know it's difficult right now with COVID, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And so I guess, a lot of people make assumptions is a big, huge misstep. I think a lot of us, my purpose in life is to connect communities through building trust. I don't come here from a place of confrontation. I come here from a place of love. My values are compassion, community, and love. And I think that, your real friends are willing to risk their friendship. It means they're willing to have those difficult conversations with you. So when I'm proposing these things, or when I'm challenging these questions, I'm doing it from a place of love and a place of, true growth and compassion. So yeah, I guess, a lot of people make assumptions that people are going to need this job. I'll just put it out there and we'll get great people from the African Nova Scotian. They'll all apply. They need this job. Well, the client, the candidate pool is 90%, like jobs are 90% candidate driven. And what I mean by that is even people that have barriers to employment are directing where they want to be employed. And so if you don't have a relationship with that community, if you haven't built up a reputation in that community, it's people aren't looking at your job or your opportunity and saying, oh, great, that's a great opportunity, I want to work there. They're saying, why do I want to work there? Do I know that organization? Have I ever met anybody from that organization? Do I know anybody that looks like me? Can I call somebody that I trust that works there? Do they have the certain policies and procedures? What kind of environment do they have? So I think a lot of assumptions are made about the recruiting process, about communities, and there's this sense of desperation that, oh, immigrants are desperate for work and anybody will take this job if I put it out. People are choosing their opportunities, and a lot of them are choosing to leave Nova Scotia. So let's not ask what can we do, but what will we do to change a lot of these things. We can continue to answer the what can we do, but it needs that action on the end of it. It's last thing I'll say, but it's like being asked from the person with their knee on your neck, how can I help you?
Okay, no, great, thanks, Bradley. Tova,
I really want to jump on what Bradley said, because I have a little story that really, it micros his macro, in the sense that I recently was working with a very large Canadian corporation, and we were discussing that very thing. What can I do? Let's be very clear now. We have the ACA, Accessible Canada Act. That has changed things and will be continuing to change things in terms of what compliance means under the ACA. Additionally, we have the Accessible Nova Scotia Act that's being worked on and developed, and there's all kinds of really important guidance and accommodation support ideas, everything coming out. So that said, that's great, but it just showed I'm sorry. What Bradley said is so true, and here's how I know. This just happened. So the large corporation says to me, Tova, we're just so frustrated. I mean, we're trying. I said, well, what do you mean we're trying? Well, we're reaching out to so-called marginalized communities like you see represented today in terms of workplace. And we we let them know we're going to send them all the ads for all the jobs we've got. And I went, wow, okay. And I'm like, so how long ago was that? It was like 2.5 years ago, but we're really frustrated. I said, okay. So tell me, how many people did you interview from that community that you're really focusing on? And they said, few. I said, okay. And how many of the community that you interviewed did you actually hire? Because this is a community you're letting me know is important to you, to let them know. You thought, you really let them know. And they go, nobody. I said, so over 2.5 to 3 years, you've sent an email, you forwarded a couple of jobs, you interviewed at best 2 or 3 people based on what you're telling me, and you've never hired anyone. What exactly, at which point do you think you were engaging that agency and that community in an authentic, or as Bradley kind of inferred, kind of a check the box kind of way? I always say it starts from even a job ad. That's your advertisement of if you're inclusive or not. And I just want to be more specific so some of the folks today can feel, they got some of those micro ideas. And the first thing I tell everybody is don't just off the job ad. Talk about what it really takes to do that job. Ask yourself if you really have to have a master's in this. I'm not saying surgeons, backyard surgeons need apply. I'm suggesting that right person, right job. The challenge is that for so many people in our community, they don't get the right. They don't get that bias removed so they can go for that right person, right job. And I actually even say in my book, Win, 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 18 Inclusionisms You Need to Be a Disability Confident Employer. And one of my first ones are, the fish stinks from the head. Now, maybe it's because I'm a maritimer, but leadership has to say clear and firm, this is more than the obligatory, I sent them a resume. And the alarm that people felt from this big corporation that wasn't enough. And they're like, so tell us 5 things we've got to do. I said, I could tell you 50 things you've got to do, but you've got to be ready to do them. You've got to be ready to acknowledge. Really, it's a sense of emotional intelligence. I hate using that term. It sounds like I'm suggesting people aren't. But the truth be told, knowing where your biases come from and who you are and what baggage you carry is going to bode very well if you're sincere as a leader about being inclusive of all people and really growing that talent pool, because you're missing an awful lot of people if you're leaving these communities out.
Great points, Tova. Nicole, what changes? What has to change in terms of that recruiting process from your perspective?
So I certainly agree with a lot of the points that were made by Tova and Bradley on this. But I think, recognizing what those blind spots are and having that real intensive conversation within the organization as to how do we truly change. I think there's a lot of organizations that don't see their blind spots because they don't see that having just one minority checkboxer in the workforce as being real diverse. And I think there's a lot of employers here that actually do fit that mold, where there's either, we have one Black or Indigenous or East Indian, whatever the scenario is. That is not diversity. That is just you making that decision to appear very outwardly as though you are inclusive. And the fact is that I think the bigger challenge that people have to really grapple with is, for most people, it's really not enough to just have one representative in an organization, because when an outsider that's looking to get into that organization looks at it, they are already seeing that this is really a token hire, and as such, I have no interest in trying to also be a second poster child for that organization. So I think deciding from the management standpoint and at the recruitment standpoint to really make that change that is deep and intrinsic throughout the entire organization, whereby we're talking openly about it, not being ashamed to say, okay, well, this is who we have been, but how do we go forward and be better? How do we go forward and be different? How do we ensure that we are actually reaching out to those diverse communities, as Tova said, and really trying to have meaningful dialogue with them? And not just going for the easy wins, which we all know exists, just across North America periods. It's not just Nova Scotia, but the fact of the matter is that I think having conversations like we are having today, and having the amount of members that have shown up to have this, to listen to this, and to understand that it's coming from a place of truth, I think that is a good way for organizations to start to really try to figure out, how do we have that honest conversation internally? And not just have that conversation where it happens because of the fact that it's part of process. So it happens at management, it happens at hiring, and it continues to happen throughout the entirety of the organization. So it's not just something that you can tick off and say, okay, well, this year we've done our diversity training and we're okay because we have one of the groups or two people of the groups or whatever the representation that people have become comfortable with. So I think that's a way for us to start reframing it and approaching it to ensure that we do have true change.
Great points. Susan, what blind spots have you seen, and just share some experience with us on ways that those blind spots could be overcome. What are your thoughts, Susan?
I agree with everything that Nicole was saying with the blind spots. You talked about tokenizing, and that seems to happen still, and it's a shame. And sometimes you don't even know that that's what it is until you get that sick feeling in your stomach, that something's not right. I think like some companies will have the, cultural awareness training or whatever you call them. And, it's like a half a day workshops or whatever, but like Nicole said, it needs to be ongoing. It needs to be from top to bottom, from the CEO, presidents to the janitor in the building. Like everybody needs to have education and awareness. Another thing too is if you want a diverse, inclusive workplace, and want to kind of like bring in people, you need to have a diversity visibly, like Nicole said, not just one or two people. You have to have them in positions where they have a voice, where they're listened to, where you value their opinions and ideas, not just sitting in an office and checking off that box that we have an Indigenous or African Nova Scotia working for you. You want them at the table making decisions with you and respecting their ideas.
Perfect, thank you. And Tracy, what are your thoughts on this?
Agree with everything that everyone said, but a few did pop out at me about blind spots. They have to take an honest look at their workforce for sure. I don't know how many times I've went into a meeting with a proponent or an organization, and I've asked them, how many Mi'kmaq do you have working for you? And they hesitate and they mumble like, no one. And I was like, that's where you have to make that relationship. And like Tova said, right down to the job ad. You can't just put it on LinkedIn and Career Beacon. That's not where our people go to look for jobs. They want to know a person. They want to know if another friend or community member has worked at an organization. They want to see themselves in the workforce, in the employer's workforce. So they need to reach out farther than just the career beacons. Find the Native employment officers in the community. Find a community champion that you can talk to about all these issues that we're talking about today in a comfortable situation and comfortable space that you can talk honestly, because these are hard questions. Racism, it's there. It's I know no one said that word, but it's there. And as an employee, I've worked in several different places where I'm the only Mi'kmaq person. And it's almost like you stick out as a sore thumb, because you know that you're the token checkbox. And it's hard. And it's a lot of pressure to put on an employee. And then you wonder why the retention isn't there, because that's a lot of pressure that you put on someone to be that checkbox, I guess. But I think the blind spot, sometimes the language they use, employers can use certain language that, honestly, I've heard people say, you people, drives me up the wall. Things like that. But I think building that connection with someone in the community, whatever diverse community that is, you have to find that champion to help you spread information about your company, about your employee process, because some of them aren't suitable for everyone. Resumes, cover letters, the interview process, you might have to think outside the box a little bit and be open to that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Doing a quick time check. It's 2:50, so another 6 or 7 minutes. We're going to go to the questions on the chat. Look, the conversation so far, again, has been so rich, and I truly appreciate the notions that have been mentioned. That the importance of relationships, of education and osmosis, the importance of attitudes being really looked at and biases. So, look, really great stuff to take away. Can we just shift a little bit? One question on the chat, and it says the question is: should I be looking at making adjustments to company policies to enable more cultural inclusivity and improve diverse candidate attraction? So if we bring it just to a policy, what are your thoughts on policy kind of imperatives around this? So Tracy, I ended with you last time. I'm going to start with you and kind of go in reverse order. And again, I'm going to ask you, if you can, folks, to keep your questions, your answers a bit shorter, because time's going by way too fast. So Tracy, what are your thoughts on the policy aspect of this?
I think that's a good starting point. I mean, if it's, a policy that a whole company is going to embrace, then it's has more solid footing than just the I know we keep saying that check box, but that's the reality of it. But also with that policy, have sound actions to go with it, actionable items that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to have the cultural competency, the training for all the staff at all the levels. I've seen companies that offer that and do that, and I applaud them for doing that, but the CEOs don't have time to take it. If it's not happening from the top down, it's not taking as a real change.
Okay, so it has to have action connected directly to it. Thank you. Susan, what are your thoughts on the policy piece of this?
I know like some businesses have that question, like the question that was just raised is like, where do you start, right? And I think it's important, again, connecting with the communities. And there are so many people that it's enough to even have those conversations. You have economic development officers, NEOs, a lot of HR people, the Native Friendship Centers, organizations like Mi'kmaq Economic Benefits Office would help you develop those engagement policies and recruitment strategies.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to change it. We're trying to get as many questions in as we can here. Nicole, I'm coming to you next.
Dawn, I have to interrupt because it's so fast.
Okay,
And
totally.
I waited patiently almost.
You're
but
on.
very quickly, policy evolves from values. I work a lot with agencies to step back and start by developing key values and engaging the entire team from the top down in that discussion. Then applying those values is where the next step comes. Applying those values as a core piece, not as an add-on. Oh yeah, what about inclusion? No. Let's step back and go right to the values. Sorry, I had to say that.
No, great. Look, great point. Okay, a couple minutes left. This question's coming to you, Nicole, and to you, Bradley. The question is, on the issue of tokenization, beyond education and osmosis, I think these are two terms that we're going to take away today. Thank you, Tova. How can the message be reframed vis-a-vis immigration and the needs of Nova Scotia in order to help transform workplaces and communities?
And I'm guessing I'm going first.
Yes, you'll take that one first, and we'll go on to we'll go Bradley. Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, not a problem. And just before we jump into that, I also want to say I felt that passionate enough about that comment that Susan was making, and Tova jumped in on that. I cannot allow it to go. I think the other problem with this is that we also have to get to the point where we understand that even if we institute policies, we have to have mechanisms to measure them to ensure that we're keeping up with what we're supposed to be doing and really having true measurement that is reflective of the growth that we would like to see. There's no point in just writing a policy and putting it on the shelf and not actually having it implemented and really measured. So that's the part. So now back to issues around how do we really combat the recruitment and so forth around tokenism.
Correct.
I think starting off understanding honestly that is an issue that many organizations face. And I really don't want to be calling out Nova Scotia organizations or businesses, because the fact of the matter is that I do feel that there's a lot of Nova Scotia businesses that are trying to get it right, but there's a lot of work that's still to be done. I think understanding right away, if you look around your organization, and you have, for whatever reason, however large the organization is, and you cannot see even an iota of diversity, or if you have one single flag that's waving within your organization, then you are obviously playing into that stereotype and playing into the short-sighted plan when it comes to issues around tokenism. The fact of the matter is that, you've heard from many of my colleagues that have mentioned these communities are connected. There's an interest in talking to each other in terms of understanding when there's not a welcomeness within a welcome environment within an organization. And that is dangerous, because what that means is that people will avoid trying to get into those organizations, because they know that if it is that they were to join an organization, they would probably be very marginalized. not just marginalized in terms of the work that they do, the contributions they can make, but also they will likely be the token person, and nobody wants to think of themselves that way. So I think in terms of what organizations need to do to really try to address that is to, first of all, look and ensure that they understand that that is something that can exist within your organization, and not be ashamed to confront it. Once it is that you've recognized it, then really trying to peel back the layers to understand why this exists. How can we try to be better? How do we try to change our policies? How do we engage with the right stakeholders to ensure that we are actually getting the right type of experiences? I cannot tell you the amount of times I have encountered groups of people that are putting out a messaging that is planning to speak to inclusion of or diversity of women, and there's literally no minorities at all on any of it. There's not any persons of disability, there's no persons of color. And the fact of the matter is that is where you lose your lens. If for whatever reason you are making the assumption that you might have just one person in the organization, or you're doing any type of broad messaging pushed out, where you're not really spending the time to look to see where you might be wrong, and having those diverse voices there giving you advice as you go along. I think that actually is a good way to actually start to really try to ensure that you're not just again ticking the box. And I know we've really overused that phrase today, but I do think that that is a good way to start looking back at your organization in terms of where you rank on the totem pole as it relates to tokenism. And very often you would be surprised when you take an honest look at the organization.
Great, Nicole, thank you. Bradley, my friend, you have the last word. We're coming up on 3 o'clock. If I could ask Bradley to share a couple of thoughts on tokenism, and then we're going to bring this great conversation to a close. Bradley?
I think Tova absolutely nailed this right on the head in terms of it comes from a place of values. If we approach a recruitment process just to hire Black people or Indigenous people or people with disabilities as the sole reason for doing it, then you're approaching it entirely in the wrong way. You need to approach your recruitment process from what are our core values and how can we bring in people that are aligned with our core values. That is a way that you feel included in an organization because you actually align with the things that they care about. You know, oftentimes we'll bring people on. I'll tell a quick example of this is a friend of mine was hired to an organization as the diversity such and such, like whatever title, diversity, whatever you want to call it, right? One of those roles. And she immediately changed her role title to head of people and culture as soon as she got the job. She's like, I'm here to lead up this sort of human dynamics staff and to implement policies. I'm not here to be the diversity, equity person. I have no background in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think a lot of people hire people that have the lived experience, but don't have any training in DEI and expect them to fix their organization. That's where you really get that sort of tokenism that people are just like, what am I doing here? They don't know anything. And they want me to fix all their problems. I don't even have any training in this. And they're asking me to fix racism. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? And then I guess because these are almost two different questions. The other one was sort of around immigration and how we can change the narrative in terms of how people view immigrants in the workforce and to create kind of a more welcoming environment. And I would just challenge that in 30 years and 20 years and 10 years, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of jobs we can't fill. We literally can't fill with our population size and the amount of retirements and frankly deaths that we're going to have as, you know, the elderly population in our communities literally frankly die out, and we're not going to have the amount of youth and we don't have the population to fill these roles. We absolutely need immigrants to come here and stay here and thrive here. So it's not a point of this desperation, is desperate immigrant fleeing somewhere to come here. And we need you badly, and we need to start creating environments where you can come here and thrive and bring your full self. And so I guess that's, that's how I would frame it.
Wonderful, Bradley. Look, folks, time has gone by way too fast, and I don't feel as if thank you is strong enough of a term to say to our panelists. The comments speak for themselves and how how incredible our participants found this today. So to the panelists, please accept our greatest of gratitude and our deep appreciation for sharing your passion and your wisdom today with us. It's important to also note that events like this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have the great partners and sponsors that the Chamber enjoys and the great support. Today's sponsors include CPA Nova Scotia, TD Insurance, NSBI, CBCL, Medavie, Cox and Palmer, and Southwest Properties. A couple quick points. Tomorrow, just a reminder that tomorrow we have our annual State of the Municipality with Mayor Savage. Always a great event. You're able to register free online at halifaxchamber.com/events. Just go to the website. And next week we have Nicole and Tova. They're both back on stage for our virtual Wonder Woman conference happening on the 19th of February. And virtual tickets are available also on the website. So back to Michelle. Michelle, back to you for a quick closing comment. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Don, for moderating. Thanks, everybody. As we said at the beginning, we knew we could only scratch the surface, but I jotted down a lot of key points I want to take back to our internal group working on this topic. And thank you to Tracy, Susan, Nicole, Bradley, Dawn, Tova. Appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully we'll be back again to see you more on this topic in 2021. Thank you. Bye-bye.